Education Digest is brought to you by the Division of Lifelong Learning at Missouri Southern State University, Joplin.
Welcome to Education Digest. I'm Dr. Jerry Williams, Director of Lifelong Learning. Here on Education Digest, we try to talk to different people with topics that we think that you might be interested in. And today we've got kind of a different topic. We're talking with a guest, which is Dr. Bob Markman, who is with the History Department here at Missouri Southern. But Bob now is engaged in a project which I think is one of the most interesting projects to be engaged in, and that's looking back at the true history through a number of different ways of interviewing, I guess what they call America's Greatest Generation. Bob, welcome to Education Digest.
Thank you.
Well, Bob, you're retired now from the History Department. And tell me a little bit about how you got started on this project, and well, maybe first tell me a little bit about what the project is.
Apparently, after the last census, some people noticed that the number of veterans of World War II had diminished. So Library of Congress started a project to interview veterans, and one of the large numbers of interviews had been done down in Branson, for example. And on our campus, Professor Larry Sabula had a student who was interviewing World War II vets for credit. And after that was over, he asked me if I might be interested in picking it up. So I stumbled into this more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And Congressman Roy Blunt was on our campus to talk about the need to do interviews locally or in this part of in this area. And he appeared on your station, by the way. And,
yes.
After that, we had a number of calls, and I know it was effective because I just interviewed a fellow who was farming up north of Fort Scott. Mm-hmm. And the reason he knew about this project was because he had seen the congressman on TV.
Well, you know, this is, I know that it's not just localized here in Southwest Missouri, but I know that across the country there's a lot of attempts to record this history. You know, you've got to look at these recordings as being just a treasure trove for historians in the future. And I think in terms of, you might talk a little bit about, as a historian, what these will mean to historians in the future.
One point I think that's important is that there is something unique in almost every interview. Somebody says covers some experience. And you're going to have Edgar Neer on, and Ed could tell us about the fact that he had to bury bodies without body bags, or that the Seabees had every person on one of the islands stamping down an air base, a forward air base, so that bombing of Japan could go on. Mm-hmm. So when you talk to each veteran, they seem to remember something that no one else seems to have noticed or isn't easily noticed, and that's interesting. We've also had a chance to pick up some papers. I interviewed a former professor at Pittsburgh State, George Hudeberg. And Professor Hudeberg had a number of letters that he had sent his mother, and she had kept them. Mm-hmm. And I picked those up, made copies of them, and sent them to the Library of Congress. And I'm working on some right now. It turns out there are a lot of them, and I'm Xeroxing them. And they may go to our special collection on the southern campus, where we have where Charles Nodler works.
Well, this would be for students coming into the programs. It'll be such a rewarding experience for them to go back and look at these first-hand documents in primary sources, I guess they're called in history, directly from the people which were involved.
Yes. And I'm not sure, because the letters were being censored, I'm not sure that there was a lot said, but they're great social documents. Mm-hmm. About what goes on every day, and also expectations of money from your folks to help get you through, because the pay, I think, was less than $20 a month.
Less than 20 a month.
So there was a need for some help from the outside, and some parents did contribute, even though we still hadn't quite gotten out of the Depression yet in the early years of the war.
Well, in doing these interviews, Bob, where do you get leads on who to interview? I mean, like you said, in one case, the person had seen something on television, but how do most of the people get in contact with you, or how do you contact them?
Well, most of this has been word of mouth. We have not advertised widely except what the congressman did for us. But it turns out if you find one veteran, he's usually, and sometimes she, by the way, is involved in a circle of friends, and they may meet once a week at McDonald's. When I talked to Professor Hudeberg, he had 4 or 5 friends at Fort Scott, and he also gave me Gordon Huggins' name in Parsons because he had once lived in Parsons. So when I went down to Parsons, Mr. Huggins gave me the names of several people.
Yeah.
And I also ended up interviewing a person or two from Korea and Vietnam, so that this has begun to go deeper because the Vietnam vets are often over 60 or 65.
Well, that's true. Everybody's aging, unfortunately. we all sort of feel that coming on there. In setting up your interviews, tell us a little bit about where you do your interviews and technically how you set them up and that sort of thing.
Well, the college has been, this is, I think the vice president, Jack Sperlin, has made it easy for me to, 1, have a camera, and 2, the people here have given me the green room if I've needed it. But people from Fort Scott or Parsons, I go there and I do the interviews in their front room. So that it all depends on what it takes to get this done.
Well, I suppose for some of these veterans of World War II, their mobility is somewhat restricted too in terms of their physical being, I suppose.
I haven't found that as much as you might expect. They get around, and I think they're happy to be able to get around. Sometimes their wives drive them around, but they are much more mobile than I thought. And almost all of them drive cars still. I hadn't thought about that much, but they are. Some of them are healthy, much healthier than I thought. On the other hand, some of them have already got some signs of senility, and less than I had thought, though.
And I suppose some of them are actually in assisted living units and things like that at this time.
I have not had one yet like that.
Oh, really?
Some are living in duplexes, so they've given up their own homes, but I think that may be partly due to the amount of money you have available for rent and things like that. But otherwise, I'm surprised about how healthy a number of these people are.
As you've talked to them, are there certain common threads that you have noticed in the interviews? I know we talked a little bit about uniqueness. We'll come back to that. But have you found sort of common threads amongst the interviewees?
Not as much as I had expected. Professor Hudeberg was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge and nearly killed. And one of the first interviews I did, the person had a similar experience. He was wounded and nearly died. One of his sergeants persisted in having the medics give him blood, and then gave him blood himself, put the plasma on himself. And he thinks the cold weather may have helped him, and that was the conclusion of Professor Hudeberg as well. So the weather may have saved him. And he lost use of a hand, and I think sometimes it's in the wounds more than in the experience. What they remembered, one of the gentlemen from Joplin remembered that crossing France was more like good wine, good bread, and women.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he didn't talk much about the battles at all, nor did he talk about any of the people that he knew, and he said he had made a studied attempt not to become involved too much, where when you talk to Ed Neer, he'll tell you that he did have a number of good comrades and friends in his unit. So what I was looking for was the common threads, and I'm not sure I found them.
Well, in some ways, I suppose one common thread probably is the traumatic events they went through, and probably in some cases their hesitancy to bring those back up and relive them in some cases.
Well, I'm not sure. I had Tom Webb from Webb City took an interview that lasted more than 4 hours. I had to go back 4 times, and it absolutely pained him. I had to turn the camera off sometimes. It absolutely pained him to recall that. And I thought I was going to find that kind of stress with a number of other people, but different veterans found different ways to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that they all felt the same kind of strain, but a number of these people were in battle and took it differently. And then a number of the people I interviewed had not been in battle at all. I had a cook from Camp Crowder who lives in Webb City also, and he trained people to cook in Europe, and he never went.
Well, we forget that when we think about World War II, that probably for every person on the front, there's probably 10 to 15 behind the front in support in getting the material there and this type of thing. At least this is still the case anyway.
The Army used to say that about Vietnam, that there only 1 in 10 people were fighting, the other 9 were in support. But I'm not sure the bases were free from being attacked at night.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as we were talking to some of your people, the bases were being bombed by Japanese, or later on, or in Europe, the Germans in there.
I think Neer may recall that too.
Yeah,
there's a chance.
In interviewing the people, and once you've got the person's story down, mechanically, what happens then to the story in the tape?
I take one DVD. If we can, we can make DVDs of them. The Southern has been donating that as well. We take a DVD to the congressman's office. Blunt has an office at the mall, and someone picks them up once a week, and then they're delivered to the Library of Congress. And we make a second copy for our library. Charles Nodler in the Special Collections has a copy. And a third copy goes to the family.
That's great. The family gets a copy.
And some of them don't have DVD players, so they get VHS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm at home, the Library of Congress, of course, is in Washington, D.C. So how do I access this, or can I access it, or how do I see these stories which we've retained?
You can use the internet to get to the Library of Congress. I think it's .org, libraryofcongress.org. We've already had one of the people I interviewed was Chief Floyd Leonard of the Miamis in Miami. And he got a call several weeks ago from a woman who said her husband had served on the same ship. She had been going through the archival material that the library had, and she found his interview. And he recalled the man's name because he said it was a small ship, and he knew most of the crew.
That's great that they can come together that way.
Yeah.
So if I'm at home, then I can go onto the web and access that DVD and listen to the interviews which you've taken place on there. Well, I think that's such a treasure for everybody that is listening on here, because it gives you the real life experience of really what was World War II and what is war in itself.
Well, it's well beyond stereotypes.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to be back in just a couple of minutes, and as we said before, Bob's going to bring a guest for us to talk to, and I think you'll find this a remarkable next 14 or 15 minutes. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Are you a Missouri Southern graduate, or do you know a graduate who would like to have a diploma that says Missouri Southern State University? If so, you'll be glad to know that replacement and gift diplomas are now available at a cost of $20. To get one, pick up a diploma request on campus, or check out the university website at www.mssu.edu. Requests must be made in writing and will not be taken over the phone. For more information, contact the registrar's office at 625-9336 or the Missouri Southern Alumni Association at 625-9355.
Welcome back to Education Digest. Our guests again are Dr. Robert Markman from the History Department, or previously from the History Department, And we're in a very fortunate situation in that Dr. Markman has brought a guest with him. And Bob, would you like to introduce your guest?
Edgar Neer, or Ed Neer, was a veteran of World War II and in in the Army, and he fought in the Pacific. And he was one of the people that we interviewed for the project for the Library of Congress.
Well, we're very honored to have you here, and we'd like to sort of discuss some things that might be covered in your project. And we might start with, it's a fascinating period for us to look back on. Mm-hmm. And I always sometimes like to look back a little bit further. And before World War II began, what were you doing, and how old were you, and what was taking place?
Well, I was living in Arkansas, and I was working. I dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and I was working around. I worked for the Moss Tire Company and just worked around town, any kind of job, And
Mm-hmm.
my buddy and I were uptown on a Sunday morning, and there's a big fire going on in a hardware store, and of course we was up there in the fireman's way, and the ball blew out, and there was a guy going up the ladder and crushed him.
Ooh.
So we helped dig him out and drug him over to a little drugstore on the corner, and we heard on the radio that the Japs had bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, this gentleman died before the doctor could get there, and so we wanted to enlist right then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't old enough. He was, but I wasn't. So I went home and got my mom to sign the papers. Well, I had a cousin that lived up in Neodesha, Kansas, and he happened to come down there. He had a car, and he said, "Oh, you don't want to go in yet." He said, "Go up there to Parsons, Kansas, and go to work at that ordnance plant." They
Right.
were making bombs and stuff. So we did. We went up there and got a job at the ordnance plant. And, well, I worked there about 6 months, and I kept threatening to quit. And the foreman said, "I'll have you in the Army. Within 24 hours, you quit." Well, Amos took us, got it in the car and took us back down. We went down to Little Rock. And by that time I was 18, and I could enlist. So I went in the Marine Corps, me and my buddy. So that's how I got in the Marines.
Well, did you have a choice back then as to which branch of the service you
Yeah.
enlisted in? Or?
Yeah, we was going in the Navy, and we got down there, and that Navy line was long. I said, "Let's get in this line."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the Marine Corps line.
Yeah.
So that's the way we wound up in the Marine Corps.
Well, how much training then? I know that during the early portion of the war, training was probably not as long, of course, as what it is today. But how much training did you have, and where did you have your training at?
We had 6 weeks training, boot camp, and then they shipped us out to Auckland, New Zealand, and we went in camp there for about 3 months. I was in the 3rd Division. It was a new division, just forming up, and we went there, and we did some hikes, but no combat training, but we was there about 3 months, and then we went to Guadalcanal, and that's where we got our training.
Well, I'd say you probably got some horrific training there.
Yeah.
Having
Yeah.
read Guadalcanal Diary
Yeah,
a
it
couple
was-
of times.
It'd been secured about 3 months when we got there. They bombed us every night, sunk one of our ships, set another on fire when we went into Teetry Point, that Coconut Grove. That's where we disembarked and set up our camp. And we got all set up in the Coconut Grove. And about noon, we had an order to move our camp inland about 200 or 300 feet. So we did. Along about 6 o'clock that evening, I heard a plane coming over. And he dropped 5 big ones right where we'd been that morning, a jet
Oh.
plane. So we lucked out there.
I'd say
And,
so.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, when you're interviewing Edgar, what type of things are you looking for in the process of your interviewing?
Well, some of it is mechanical, that asking what part what divisions he served in and what his jobs were. And usually, though, I just let the veteran take over the interview because most of them know what they want to say. And that turns out to be more true than not.
Yeah. Well, I would think that, the experiences which you've gone through are things which are remarkable for anybody to have gone through. I had, of course, family which had also served in the Pacific, too, and have looked through the pictures that were taken during that time period. And it's almost, it's very hard for us almost to identify with what probably had taken place in those situations. During the period, what sort of camaraderie developed between you and the other members of service? Because that's always something that seems of interest to me.
We were very close. I had the job of burying the dead. Me and my outfit was in the Graves Restoration Unit, and our first campaign was on Bougainville, and of course we hadn't seen any dead people up till then, and I was on detached duty to the 3rd Raider Battalion. I was in charge of seeing that all the bodies got back to the beach where they could be buried, and it was, I freaked out.
Oh, I would think so.
First time, and then we had to dig up isolated burials. We dug 7 Marines up one time in one hole, and they'd been there about 2 weeks. And you'd pick a hold of them, their arm, and they'd come off in your hand. That was terrible.
Well, I think so often that's the one thing which always we watch movies and this sort of thing, we really don't get an understanding of the tremendous impact it has to have on the spirit of a person having to do something like that. And
then we was there. It rained 19 days straight there on that island while we was there, and we all got jungle rot.
Oh yeah.
From not being able to get dry,
Right.
Things like that.
Well, I've had some friends which also suffered from jungle rot from the Vietnam experience.
Yeah,
It's something that sort of stays with you for a long time on there.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit also about after the war and coming back. How was life different? I mean, we'd had the life prior to the war, and then the war. And then what is different about when you come back?
Well, I got married.
Well, that changes everybody's life quickly.
Oh yeah. I got married on June the 3rd, 1945, and of course I never had a place for my wife to come back to the base to, so she had to go home, and it was about 3 months before she could get back to see me where we was at. I finally found a room for us, and then after I got discharged, I couldn't find a job. It took me, I did anything I could find for about 5 years, and finally got a job working for the Frisco Railroad, firing the old steam engines between Yodashay and Wichita.
Oh yeah.
And I did that for a couple of years, and then I had a chance to go to work at the refinery over at Yodashay, and I needed a GED. So it's been a long time since I'd been in school, so I went down to Independence Junior College and took the test, and I passed everything but the math. And the guy said, well, stick around a while, take it again. And I did, and I passed it, so I got hired over at that refinery. And I got in the electricians and worked out an apprenticeship, and I was an industrial electrician then for the next 25, 30 years.
Well, there was, prior to, of course, the war, we'd just gone through the Depression era, and jobs, of course, were very scarce then. And yet coming back, like you're talking about there was a transition from out of that war economy into a peacetime economy, which also was a difficult economic period.
Yeah, it was hard to find a job, and I drawed my 5220 as long as I could, Yeah. And,
were you able to take much advantage of the GI Bill then when you got back?
I could have, yeah, but I didn't. I bought a house.
Great, yeah.
Later on. In 1951 or 2, we bought a home.
Well, do you have a chance to get together with fellow veterans which had seen time in the Pacific or not?
No, I really haven't. I just never had that chance. I know I'd like to have got in contact with some of the boys' mothers and fathers that were killed, but I was too late on one of them. He had died, or his folks had died 2 years before, and he was killed on Guam. Sergeant Rawls. He stepped on a landmine, blew his legs off here at the knees, and part of his chin, slammed me down, dislocated my jaw. I was disoriented for 2 or 3 days in the hospital.
Well, you said you saw action in Guam. You saw action in several other what other places?
Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima. You were
Yeah,
there?
that was my last one. Yeah.
So you were pretty much active in most of that island hopping
Yeah.
events that took
three,
place.
3 campaigns.
Yeah.
Yeah, I helped bury the dead and bring the wounded back from the lines. And
What was it like shipboard between islands?
hot.
Hot.
Hot and stuffy, and there wasn't any air conditioning. If you could, you slept above decks, out in the open.
Probably the only air you could really get.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they had you packed in like sardines.
I was going to say, I suppose all those ships were pretty well packed with people.
Oh yes.
And equipment moving from one area to the other.
Yeah.
On it.
Yeah, they were. But I wouldn't want to do it again.
Well, we'd hope that one wouldn't have to do something like that again. It's when we look back at what your generation has gone through and the sacrifices that took place during that period, not only in terms of your lives and times, but the loss of friends and people you got to know. It's
Lost Sergeant Potts, our sergeant, the first night on the beach at Guam. I don't know why he got out of his foxhole, but he did. And our Marine Gunner McBee, our commanding officer, shot him in the back of the head.
sort of friendly fire problem.
Well, yeah, the Japanese, we'd had a banzai charge just before that. And I don't know what happened to Sarge. He might have flipped out, I don't know. But anyway, we buried him.
Yeah. Well, our generation is so grateful to what your generation has done for us, and I just want to thank you very much for being here with Bob on Education Digest.
Well,
it's a great opportunity for me to get to know a real hero.
Thank you. I'll go hero. I buried our heroes.
Well, thank you very much for being with us on Education Digest, and we'll see you later on.
I'm on the road a lot, so making it to a class really isn't an option.
With distance learning from Missouri Southern State University, video, DVD, and internet courses allow you to learn from virtually anywhere.
I can't take time out of my day to watch some lecture.
When you enroll in an MSSU distance course, you study when it's convenient for you, and you may never step foot on campus.
Aren't those correspondence courses really expensive?
Surprisingly, Missouri Southern offers the lowest cost university degree in the state, and in many cases, financial aid is available for distance students. To see if a distance education is right for you, visit our website or give us a call. Distance learning from Missouri Southern State University. We have the answers.